Everyone, my name is Chelsea. Welcome to Little Mountain Ranch. I'm happy to have you here with me today. We are hanging out in the kitchen, which means we are going to do some cooking. But before we get into what we're going to make today, I wanted to share with you a giveaway that we are hosting, and it is starting today. The draw will be on February 7th, and we are giving away 4 of our Little Mountain Ranch handmade, hand-painted, Canadian-made mugs. Aren't they beautiful? And this is my favorite mug of all time. I am so happy with the way that it turned out. And with the mug, so we're offering 4 different prizes, a mug and a Little Mountain Ranch family cookbook. So you'll get both of these if you win the giveaway. All you have to do to enter it is to be on our email list. I'll put a link to sign up for that down in the show notes below. If you already receive our newsletter, then you are automatically entered into this giveaway, and I'm so happy to be able to put a few more of these beautiful mugs in your hands. They are still available in our store. We have a few left, and if you would like to purchase one, we deeply appreciate the support. I wanted to thank all of you who have already purchased one of our Little Mountain Ranch mugs. I deeply appreciate it, as well as the potter. Her name is Hannah from the Potter's Homestead. She also appreciates it as well. When you purchase products like this, you are supporting small businesses, and that support just means the world to those of us that are running small businesses. So thank you so much. Like I said, we'll be doing the draw on February 7th, and you'll be notified via email on February 8th if you won one of these beautiful mugs and our cookbook. We have all decided that homemade pasta is there's just no comparison to it. And we know exactly what's going in it. We're using our own organic flour to make this. Well, that's not our organic flour, but we're using organic flour to make the pasta, and organic eggs and all of that kind of stuff. And to buy organic pasta like that from the store is just not really feasible for us because of the quantity that we make whenever we have a pasted meal. So my goal here today is to make enough to last us for an entire month. I've really been doing a lot of bulk making of food recently, where I make enough of, say, snacks for the entire week, or lunches or breakfasts for the entire week. And it is just fantastic. I love when I get in these modes of doing this because I always just appreciate it so much. And I don't know why I don't do it all the time, but I seem to ebb and flow with this kind of bulk food making, but I'm very much in the flow of that right now. So we're going to get to that, but I already have 3 batches that we made up yesterday, and they've just been sitting in the fridge, and apparently this does help to improve the flavor. But one thing I did notice is that it was quite firm when it went into the fridge, like pasta dough is supposed to be, and now it's very soft. And I think that's just because of the fermentation process that started in this. It's just kind of softened out that gluten that's in here. So I might need to add a little bit more flour to make it firm enough to be able to put through my pasta roller over here. But we'll see. This is an experiment. I've never done it this way before, but I am going to put together a fresh batch so that I can show you how to do it. One other thing that I wanted to do was to feed my sourdough starter. So I am a seasonal sourdough starter. Not sourdough starter. I'm not a seasonal sourdough starter. I am a seasonal sourdough bread maker. Usually that's something that I reserve for the winter time. So I'm always starting a new starter every year. And I don't find it that difficult to do. It doesn't take that long, so I don't mind having to start a fresh one. This one is this is the 3rd day of feeding it. And I like to start my sourdough starter with half whole wheat flour and half white flour. I just find that it activates all of I guess it doesn't activate, but it feeds the bacteria really well and gets everything going. It is quite cool in my house right now, and I find that when I'm starting my sourdough starter, it does need a little bit of warmth. My office is the warmest room in the house right now, so I've actually been keeping my sourdough starter down there, and it's been working really well. So I wanted to show you how I feed it. So I'm not somebody that weighs out my sourdough starter at all. Ooh, we got lots of bubbles in there. Let me show you this. Look at how bubbly that starter is already. So like I said, we're just on day 3 right now, and it's already starting to smell kind of sour. I am tempted to try a loaf. I think I'm going to. Actually, I've never attempted to make a sourdough loaf of bread this early in the process. Usually it takes a good 7 days to really get a super active starter. You can use your sourdough discard. That's what's called. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So for those of you that don't know about sourdough, what I'm gonna say is gonna sound confusing. So let's start back at the beginning again. So in order to start this, I put around 2/3 cup of white flour and a third, I guess it would be a cup of whole wheat flour in here. And then I added enough water to it to make a thick paste. I let that sit for 24 hours. I discarded, so that's a word that you'll hear when talking about sourdough, and that's just when you take out usually about half of the starter that you have, you discard it or use it to make something, which we'll talk about in a second. And then you add another half a cup of flour and as much water as you need to give it, to get it back to that kind of thick paste consistency again. And you keep doing this for a couple of days when you're starting, and then every 12 hours at about day 4 or so. And then usually by day 7, you have an active starter. And how you know you have an active starter is lots of bubbles, like mine already has here, and then it will double in size. And the way that you can tell that is either, like me, just kind of look and I roughly know how much I have in there. And then once it gets up to here in the morning, I know we're good to go. Or you can put an elastic band on there so that you can visually see. Once it's about doubled, then it's good to go for making bread. We're not quite there yet, but I'm gonna try. What the heck, why not? Whenever I show this bowl, people always ask about it because it is just such a beautiful bowl. So this was actually sent to me by a subscriber, and it is Ohio stoneware, and it is hands down my favorite. So we're gonna jump right into making a loaf of sourdough bread, and we're gonna see how it goes. And then we'll move on to doing our pasta when we're done this. To make a loaf of sourdough bread, we're going to start with around a half a cup of our surprisingly active starter here. We're gonna leave the rest in our jar and we'll deal with that in a minute. So we have half of a cup in there, and it already smells nice and sour, which is what you want. Going to grab our whisk here. And this one, because I'm sure will be asked, I got from Ballerina Farm, and it is just the best whisk for mixing our sourdough. We're going to add 2 cups of lukewarm water to this. So right into there. And we're going to mix this together really well. I'm gonna be so excited if I can actually get a decent loaf of sourdough out of this. I doubt it's going to be very high or very full of bubbles, but you never know. And into this, we're going to add flour. And we're going to add enough flour to make what I call a shaggy dough. And I'll show you what that looks like. So we're at 3 cups now. Okay, we're getting there. Add a little bit more flour. We'll do another 2/3 a cup. Okay, can you see this now? So we're still kind of like a really super thick paste. And I feel like I could add just a little bit more. So one thing to keep in mind is as your flour hydrates, it's gonna thicken your dough a little bit. So you're better when it comes to sourdough to go a little bit runnier than you might think you need. Aha, here we go. Okay, here we go. Now we have what I'm looking for here. So you can see I can kind of get it into a bit of a ball here, but very, very sticky. Okay, some people add their salt in at this point. I don't. I let this sit, and especially because this is a very young starter here, not super active. The salt kind of, it flavors it, but it also slows down the yeasts a little bit. So I want to leave this and let this kind of get going before I add the salt. So we're gonna cover this up with a damp tea towel. You can use saran wrap too. And we're gonna double it so that it doesn't dry out. We'll let this sit for around 30 minutes. That was a spontaneous shift in my plans, but one that I'm really excited about because I love sourdough bread so much. So now we have our starter here, and what we're gonna do is add roughly half a cup of flour to this, and around a quarter cup of water. And we're going to mix this in really, really well so that all the flour is incorporated. I find that the edge of my jar starts getting kind of gross. So usually every week or two, I'll switch out the jar and start with a fresh one, but I do always try to wipe off the rim of it. Otherwise, there can start developing little mold and just kind of gross around the edge. So I find that if I use a cloth on the top of my starter, too much air can get in there and it kind of dries out and crusts up the top of my starter. So I'm actually just putting a pickle pipe on here, and this is an idea I had just now to try doing, because often I'll just loosely put on a mason jar lid, just a regular snap lid. But I'm going to try this on here because I have it sitting right here. So why not give it a try? And that way, if there's any extra gases in there, they could potentially release out of the top of my pickle pipe. These are called mason top pickle pipes. And I have had this overflow before, so I just put this on kind of loosely so this could pop up if it did decide to overflow. And then always, where's my plate? Put it on a plate just in case of that overflow. And that's just gonna sit on there. Starting tomorrow, I'm gonna be feeding it twice a day, so once in the morning and once at night for the next couple of days. But honestly, I don't even know if I'm gonna need to because it's already so active. So I'll let you know how that goes. Now let's make ourselves some pasta. And I do know that I say pasta with a Canadian accent, and lots of people say pasta. I say pasta because I'm Canadian. So what we're gonna do here to start our pasta is we're gonna do 2 cups of all-purpose flour. I'm gonna make a little well in the middle. Gonna add a good pinch of salt and 3 eggs. So I have taken to, when I'm making my pasta, to putting my eggs in a vessel like this and then giving them a whisk before I add them into here. Whereas before, and I've shown this before, I would just crack my eggs right in there and mix it right into this. I just find this a little bit easier. To add a little splash of olive oil to my egg and then into here, and then slowly mix our eggs into our flour. Now I find that in this case, to slowly start incorporating it makes the mixing of it and just the kneading of it so much easier than if you just really get aggressive and try to kind of mix everything in all at once. Okay, I'm just gonna grab my apron because I know I'm gonna get stuff all over myself. And then also a convenient place to wipe my hands off. Okay, at this point, once you kind of have a little bit of a soft dough here, this is when you can get your fingers in there. And I still like to, rather than taking all of this flour and putting it into this pile, I like to go just a little bit at a time so that I can stop when I have the right consistency that I want here. And I find like rolling it over like you can see me doing here and then pushing down with the palm of my hand works really well for just keeping the dough nice and smooth. So we're going to keep going and keep adding flour until we have quite a firm dough. And then we're going to knead for around 8 minutes or so. I'm actually going to set my timer now because we're getting to that point. A little bit more flour and that'll be perfect. Kind of 6 to 8 minutes, depending on how strong and forceful you are. Dan and one of my boys can get something kneaded that takes me 8 minutes and about 5 minutes. Okay, this is good to me. Not as far as kneading, but just as far as the amount of flour I want in there. So I'm going to push off a bunch of this flour here. Just add a little onto my spot there so it doesn't stick. So you really shouldn't have much stickiness to your dough at all at this point, and if you do, add a little more flour. Okay, so this is what you're looking for. So you want a little bit of spring back on your dough like so, and we're going to set our dough aside and cover it up and let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes. And I'm just going to take some of our dough out of this bag and then use this bag to cover this up with. I'm going to roll this out a bit. It's actually not too bad for being sticky. I think it'll be okay to put through our pasta maker. So I'm going to cut this in half and in half again. And I like to try to make these a little bit of a rectangle before I start putting them through our roller. So what we want to do with this is an Atlas manual pasta maker. I do have dreams of buying an attachment for my Ankerstrom mixer for doing this, because this is a little time consuming. So we're going to set this at 1, and we're going to put our dough through. Oh, this is actually working great. I was worried it would be too soft, but nope. Okay, so we're going to put it through twice, and then I'm going to fold it in half, and we're going to put it through again. And run it through that twice. And then we're going to adjust it to number 2, and we're going to keep going until we achieve the thickness that we're going through with this. So I'm looking to make kind of a broad fettuccine style noodle. So it doesn't need to be too thin. So we're at 4 now. From this dough, I've never seen this happen before with pasta dough, but can you see the bubbles? There's little bubbles in there from it being in the fridge and fermenting for, I don't know, 24 to 48 hours or so. I bet you the flavor is going to be really good. So we're almost at the thickness we want. So we're at a 6 right now. I think we'll go to a 7. You can see that. It's looking really nice. Beautiful. All right, look at how lovely that looks. So we're going to lay this down over here with a little bit of flour on the counter and continue on with going back to 1 and through all of this pasta. So I'm just going to work through all this. I'll be back with you when I have our stuff that has sat in the fridge through, and then I'll show you the fresh pasta. This is all of the dough that had sat in the fridge, and I have to say I really love working with this. It was lovely. So this is the stuff that I made, and this is a little soft. I should have added a little bit more flour to it. Over on the stove, you can probably hear the onions frying over there. So I have decided to make my chicken penne recipe. Well, it's actually my mom's chicken penne recipe out of my cookbook, and it is probably, I would say, as far as meals go, meal recipes go in my cookbook, my favorite. It is so incredibly delicious. So I just decided that I was in the mood to actually eat some of this delicious pasta for dinner tonight. So I'm going to show you how to make that as well. And if there's one recipe in my cookbook that you try, I highly suggest this be one of them, because it is so good. And with this addition of this fresh pasta, it's going to be other level. I am going to be using a lot of ingredients that we have stored or that I put up during the summer from the garden in this recipe, or we raised on the farm. So we're going to be using canned chicken rather than fresh chicken breast. So I have all the ingredients out over there. We're going to be using some canned tomatoes, frozen peppers that we froze. What else are we gonna use? Onions and garlic from the garden. Actually, I think those onions were store-bought because I actually ran out of onions this year. So I have to keep that in mind when I start all my seeds next month, that I need to start more. And then of course this homemade pasta. So this is gonna be, ooh, that is a little sticky. I'm gonna just grab a little bit of flour and just add a little flour to this so that it doesn't stick. It's just a little bit harder to work with if your dough is extra soft like this. That's why you really need to make sure that your dough, when you're kneading it, is quite firm. I have to say, rolling out this much pasta by hand like this, you can definitely feel it in my back. That is for sure. Just probably kind of being a little bit hunched over. Okay, let's give these onions a stir. It's kind of a perfect day to be doing this kind of thing though, because it is snowing. It's not currently snowing, but it's been snowing for most of the morning, and we're supposed to get more snow this afternoon. Okay, 2 more. Oh my gosh. Definitely getting an electric one. That would be really nice. You can see the difference in the color between this fresh one and the one that I put in overnight. But honestly, I don't think I'll ever do it any other way again. Having it stay in the fridge for a day or two. We'll see how it tastes, because now we're going to actually use some to make this recipe, and I'll be able to tell you how it tastes. But I've heard that it improves the flavor quite a bit. Okay, so I have a couple of onions over there frying in some olive oil and 6 cloves of garlic. So I'm just gonna add the garlic to the onions now. I like to fry my onion first until it is very close to being done, and then add my garlic, because garlic tends to burn if you put it in at the same time as the onion. My favorite kitchen smell in the world is garlic and onion frying. It smells so delicious. Last one, thank goodness. My pasta maker has an attachment for making fettuccine sized noodles. And normally I don't use it, I just cut everything by hand, but I'm kind of wondering if with the pasta that fermented in the fridge for a couple of days, it's just a completely different type of texture, and I'm wondering if it will go through the cutters better than it does when it's fresh, because I find that it, especially if it's at all soft like this stuff, it gets stuck in it. So we'll give it a try just for fun and see. Well, that worked beautifully, didn't it? It's not wanting to grab it because it's not sticky enough. Okay, those ones we might do by hand. Let's try. So this is the fresh pasta. And that worked nicely. Okay, so these ones, the soft ones, didn't quite cut all the way. So I think we'll just go to doing it by hand. These ones are perfect, but it's having a hard time grabbing them because it's so dry. So if we're cutting these by hand, we're gonna roll up halfway on one side, halfway on the other side. And then unroll them like so. I think I can go a little bit thinner with those. So the reason that you go half and half like this is because if I were to cut this and cut these this way, they're just harder to unroll after. Whereas with this, you can just grab them like so, and shake them out like that. So I'm just gonna get all of these cut, and then I'll be back with you when I'm done, and we'll move on to getting our sourdough onto its next step. So here I am thinking that I'm going to have a month's worth of pasta from all of this. No, friends, I'm going to have probably 2 meals worth of pasta from all of this, but that's okay. So we probably have some type of pasta dish once a week. So I am going to have to make much, much more if I want to actually make all the pasta that we eat. And I'll be perfectly honest, I don't see that happening, but I can imagine doing a big pasta making day like this once a month to at least have a couple of meals of homemade pasta, because it's so good. Okay, so now what we're gonna do though is we're gonna push this back, and I'm just gonna leave this out because it'll just air dry here. So this is, oh, we got lots of bubbles in there. Can you guys see all those bubbles? So this is our, had been resting for around 30 minutes, turned out to be more like 45. We're gonna grab some salt, and we're going to add close to a tablespoon of salt to this. So I just keep a little bowl of water to keep my fingers moistened, and that helps them not stick when I'm doing this, mixing the salt into my dough here, giving it a little stretch at the same time. You know, I think I might actually get a decent loaf of bread out of this. That'd be very exciting. I think I probably could have used a little bit more flour in this. Just add a little bit more. So we want this to rise now until it's around double in size. And the temperature of your house is going to make a big difference with how long this process takes. It can even take up to 12 hours. So making sourdough bread in the evening isn't a bad idea, because then you can let it rise overnight. I'm actually going to put my bread proof option on my stove, which will make a nice warm environment in my stove, and pop it in there. The only thing you want to make sure if you do that is that you keep your towel on the top moist, because it's going to dry out in the temperature or in the heat of the stove. Bread proof, which sets it at around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to moisten this. You have a couple of options here at this point. You can let your bread rise till it's double in size, and then we'll put it into our proofing basket and let it proof for probably another, I don't know, hour or so, and then bake it. Or you can do what I'm going to do, and that is stretching and folding the dough every around hour or so until it's a nice big size. And the reason for that is because it just helps to increase the structure of the dough. So it's not going to have quite as many big air pockets in it, and it'll be a little bit more, not really dense. I don't really know how to explain it. I'll just show you when we're done if this turns out. So I'm going to pop this over on the stove. In the stove rather. This recipe is kind of a 1 skillet recipe, but because I'm doubling it, I'm using 2 skillets here. So we have 1 onion, 3 cloves of garlic in one, and 1 onion and 3 cloves of garlic in the other. We are going to add some sun-dried tomatoes in oil to this. And the recipe is on page 83 of the cookbook here. And we'll also put this in a blog post next week for you as well. So I am using canned chicken breast for this recipe, and I'm not going to add the chicken until the very end of cooking. Whereas normally if you're using fresh chicken breasts, you would be frying those up at this point. But canned chicken does tend to fall apart and lose its structure once it's been canned. So I just want to put that in. Hey, hun. I just want to put that in at the very end just so it doesn't happen. Pardon me? Yes, it is going to be very yummy. So we're going to add half a cup of sun-dried tomatoes to each of these. Yes, it sure is. Go ahead. Yeah, you can in the other side of the sink there, hun, if you want. And we're going to add a little bit of this oil here. I love sun-dried tomatoes. We are going to add, well, first we should probably turn our elements on here. We're going to add 1/4 of canned tomatoes to each of these. with the juice. So these are our frozen peppers, a mix of red and green pepper. So we want 1 red pepper and 1 green pepper for each one. So I'm just gonna, I'm just going to eyeball this here. And then the rest of these will go into the fridge and I'll use them in another recipe later. Peppers freeze so well. You don't have to do anything fancy to them. You can just chop them up and freeze them. You don't even have to blanch them, which is just fantastic. So we're gonna get these simmering here. We're gonna add a tablespoon of Italian seasoning to each of these. Some pepper. How's the shop clean going? Good. A pinch of salt. All right, now I'm gonna add a little pinch of baking soda to both of these because I'm gonna add some cream and I don't want my cream to curdle. And this is a trick that works very well for that. Normally for this recipe, I would be adding cream cheese around half a block to a block, depending on how creamy you want it. But I don't have any. So I am going to be using cream instead. So I'm not sure if you can see the cream line right there. So we're gonna add around a cup or so of cream. What is it, kitty? Alex, you wanna go outside? The sun's actually coming out now. I have our pot of water over here. I put about a tablespoon of salt in there, and then I'm gonna be cooking up our pasta, but let's add our chicken. So I did drain the liquid out of the chicken. So we're just gonna carefully mix this in and then just let it heat through. What I usually make this recipe with is penne, and I cook the penne just until it's kind of al dente, so just a little bit firm still, and then I add it into this and simmer it so that the pasta really absorbs the flavor of this sauce. But because I'm using the homemade pasta, and also my pans here are very, very full and I don't think I have room for it in here, what I am going to do instead is make my pasta, and then I'll just mix everything in my big pot here. I don't know if you can see this down here, but the chicken, you can see how the chicken's kind of falling apart like that, so I don't want to stir it too much either. So we'll just have it on low, and in our homemade pasta goes. It does not take very long at all to cook homemade pasta like this. Once it floats up to the top, it is done. It doesn't take much this time of year to bring me a little bit of joy. I am not a big fan of January and February. I have said that over the years on this channel many times, I'm sure, and I am definitely feeling that kind of end of January vibes going on where I'm just like, oh my gosh, spring is never gonna come. And things like this just bring me a little sparkle of joy. And that amount of pasta did work for 2 recipes for us. So that's awesome. I'm just gonna let the noodles over there dry out, and then I'll just put them in a bag and use them when we're ready. Yum. So we're gonna strain these out. I saved a little bit of the pasta water in there just to help thicken this up. And now we're going to dump this right in here. You know what? We're just gonna add all of it. We're gonna have very saucy noodles. Oh yeah, that was the way to go. If you use the cream cheese, you definitely get a creamier sauce. then with the cream. And if you used a heavy whipping cream too, that would also help a little bit with making it thick. This isn't super thick, but it looks amazing. Let's try some. Oh my goodness. Oh, if I didn't say this already, if you try one recipe that I share, and you like all these ingredients, of course, you've got to try this because it is so good. And with the homemade pasta, my word, talk about luxurious. I'm going to sit down and enjoy eating this meal. I'll be back with you in about 23 minutes and 34 seconds to do our first stretch and fold on our sourdough bread. Okay, we're going to do our stretch and fold. Look at the bubbles. Can you see those bubbles in there? Very exciting. So all we're going to do here is stretch and fold our dough over. And we're going to do this about 4 times. We're going to let it rise again. And we're going to keep doing this probably I don't think it's going to take that long, honestly, to get to the point that I'm going to be able to actually make a loaf, because this is just such an act of starter, which is very exciting. I'll be back with you once we're at the forming the dough part of all of this. Okay friends, 8 hours total and about 4 stretch and folds, and now I'm just laying it out on my counter, and then I'm going to be folding the edges together into the middle, and then you'll see here how I flip it over, and then I pull it towards myself gently to form the loaf. I use rice flour whenever I'm doing anything at this point, because the rice flour doesn't taste kind of weird the way that whole wheat flour or wheat flour does when it's baked in the oven, when it's kind of raw like this. So this is my rattan proofing basket, and I'm going to put my loaf in here, the nice smooth side down, rough side up, and I'm going to leave that for 30 minutes. I have put my Dutch oven in the oven at 450 degrees Fahrenheit to heat up for around 20 minutes. And then I get a piece of parchment paper and flip my bread onto that parchment paper and place it very carefully into this very, very hot Dutch oven. Then I will be baking it in the oven for around 20 minutes at 450 degrees covered. Then I'll uncover it and bake it for another 30 to 40 minutes until it's really nice and dark brown. Right now I'm just using a knife, this is called a bread lame, to just cut a nice deep cut in the surface of the bread, and that just helps to give it a nice rise. So we're going to put it in the oven here, and I'll show you when it's all done. Okay friends, it is the next morning because it was late last night when we ended up getting home, and I put that bread in the oven, but I did end up cutting off a fairly good size hunk of it last night and having it warm with butter, and it was very delicious. It definitely didn't, oh, one sec. That's for some apple cobbler that we're having for breakfast this morning. But I wanted to show you the bread. So I didn't get a huge amount of lift on it, which I expected with that very young starter that we used. But I did end up with some nice bubbles inside of there. And the flavor of this is really good. It actually tastes perfect. And you can see that the crumb is fairly dense, which I did expect, again, with just that young starter that I used. But the flavor was great and definitely completely edible. So I will be using the discard every time I'm feeding my starter for the next couple of days to get it really active, to just make more bread, because I don't mind a denser loaf like this. And sourdough bread is just so darn delicious. All right, friends, that is going to be it for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and don't forget to enter our giveaway by signing up for our newsletter down in the show notes below if you haven't already, and that is going to be for the mugs and the cookbooks. Hope you have a fantastic day, everyone, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.